logistical reminders. We are a solid group. We have been together for a number of months through 4 sessions. So let's leave our video on. Let's remember NIRN's approach to this is not sit and get. It's very much interact with your colleagues, get to know one another. This is an opportunity to network. So if it's possible, if you're in a space, oh, look at all the cameras popping on. I love it. And fixing our hair, making, whoo, wasn't expecting that. Put that camera on. You'll be muted in the main session, but when you go into the breakout rooms, feel free to unmute. If you want to share in the main session too, you have the ability to unmute. So feel free to, if you have any thoughts or insights to share. When you're in your breakout groups, today there will be a little bit of note keeping in the last breakout group, but that's the only one. So that's good news. And of course, you have all the reactions and we will be monitoring chat as we go along. So feedback from the last session, you guys really loved Karen and Yolanda's storytelling. I'm going to take those barrier busting conversations that Yolanda and Karen did and actually turn it into a podcast, I think, because it was really refreshing to hear that, that we too at NIRN have barriers we have to bust through. We are not the experts on everything, and we try really, really hard. You guys also told us that you really appreciated the time to share and learn with one another without having a task to do. That was key, right? Just being able to have those solid conversations without having to do any note taking. You wanted more time together and actually want follow-up from this session. Some of you put that in your feedback that you want this to keep going. So we're going to take that into consideration when we think about what our next steps are. Couple of things that we pulled from that we wanted to make sure we touched on. More support around addressing power differentials. That was something that came clear not only in the Mentimeter, but also in your feedback from the survey. So we are providing that for you today. Connecting the core competencies to the implementation drivers was a piece of feedback that we received. And I wanted to lift that up because we've been connecting it to the stages, but really I love the idea of connecting it to the drivers as a potential next step. And what does that look like? And how can we engage more responsibly to context and addressing the importance of student and teacher voice? I love this because this is a barrier that we're facing, right? This is hard work. It's messy work, as Karen always says. Implementation science is messy work. And a lot of times we want to be responsive and we want to hear student teacher voices. And I recently read an article on this concept of rapid implementation. So we're digging into that a little bit because of what happened with the pandemic. So we're hearing your voices and you gave us a ton of feedback to follow up on. All right. Results from the Mentimeter self-reflection. So we took a look at each of the domains of the core competencies, the Mentimeter you guys completed during our session. And we pulled out strengths and opportunities for growth for this group based on that data. And so what we found was we felt as a group that tailoring our support and co-designing really was a strength for us, but we wanted to learn more about co-learning, brokering, and addressing power differentials. The Mentimeter results are linked in the PowerPoint session today. So if you want to go back and take a look at what the results were from the group, go right on ahead, but it's a really good data point for us. Ongoing improvement, strengths were assessing need, facilitation, and communication. Some opportunities for growth. We really just want to learn more about those implementation science strategies, the frameworks, the methodology behind it. I think a lot of us come from a consulting world and a coaching world. And when you apply the implementation science on top of it, we're always learning. And I think, Karen, I think it's fair to say that we do that at NIRN. We have learning sessions every month internally because it is constantly changing and things are being modified because it is a relatively new area of research. Also indicated was conducting improvement cycles and understanding context. So we have some resources we're going to share with you in these areas of growth today. Solid across the board, though, on sustaining change. Building those relationships, developing teams, building capacity, cultivating leadership, all were very, very strong skill sets within our group. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that today. Some NIRN updates before we jump into our content for the remainder of our time together. Learning modules. We have learning modules coming out on a regular basis. Thanks to Wendy Morgan and her team and the AI Hub, or the Active Implementation Hub team. They are working diligently on scripting and creating these to go along with the core competencies. We recently released Grow and Sustaining Relationship. That was released as early as Monday. That's our newest release. And then coming out soon will be Understanding Context. That will be out before the end of the year, I believe. And then Karen's like, yes, ma'am. And then I know Karen and I are working on the next one, which is building capacity. So that will be out in March. So we're going to have a steady flow of these interactive modules, thanks to Wendy and her team. And an important update coming out, if you are familiar with the Active Implementation Hub, it's getting a nice, clean redesign. We've been working with a focus group, and we've been working with our internal tech team. And by the end of January, we will have a new Active Implementation Hub. We have some transition and communication pieces coming out, but it really grounds us in both the active implementation formula as well as these core competencies, and more importantly, it makes things easier to find when you go to the hub. And that was our number one thing for you. So that is coming. We also are going to have a NIRN Active Implementation newsletter coming out towards the end of this month. It's our first one. It's going to contain an opportunity to continue this conversation and join a Slack community. Submit your ideas for strategies, but most importantly, we have t-shirts. You will be able to order t-shirts as an honorary NIRNian, which everybody I think is super excited about. And so that order form and all of that will be in the newsletter. Karen, is there anything you want to add to the NIRN updates?
I just want to note, NIRN is not making any financial money off the t-shirts. All we have done is work with a vendor to give designs and feedback. You will get a form that connects you directly to that vendor. There is no exchange of money with NIRN, with you in purchasing t-shirts, or between NIRN and the vendor. I just want to make sure that that is really clear. We had gotten some t-shirts printed for a forum event on one of our projects, and we had them on, and people kind of went nuts asking where they could get those. So we're trying to be responsive, but I just have to do my legal financial requirement and say there is no exchange of money with NIRN.
So as part of this series and joining the conversation and throughout the last couple months, you'll be receiving that newsletter towards the end of the month. So keep an eye out for it. It's going to have a lot of goodie information for you, exciting things coming down the pipeline from NIRN moving forward. So with that review and our updates, let's set the stage for how we're going to spend our time together. Last time we were together, we went through these implementation specialist competency rating. We had you do it individually, as well as through a Mentimeter, so that we could collect some data. It was fascinating to see what the responses were. And what's been really interesting is, as we have these conversations, we're starting to see a lot of patterns and correlations between where people feel really strong at and where they would like to learn more. And that's really going to help guide our resources for the field. So thank you so much for that. If you don't have it handy, you might want to pull it up. I'm going to have Amelia put a link of the rating tool in the chat so you can have it available. If you have your own individual one, that would be amazing, because we are going to spend some time with a little bit of reflection today. We're going to jump in and kind of pull ourselves back to where we were in our last session. Take about 5 minutes for individual reflection here. Think about the 15 core competencies that we've covered over the series. And what have you been working on since last August? Were there specific things you noted that were a strong area for you? Were there areas you wanted to learn more about, an area of growth? Did you find yourself seeking a resource, or did you find yourself pulling them back up and being like, oh, I forgot about these. I need to remember to use this as a resource. What progress have you made towards really digging in and utilizing the core competencies in your day-to-day work? So we're going to do about 5 minutes of reflection, and then we're going to open it up to a pair and share. I'm going to put you in a room with someone, and you're going to share your individual reflection with that individual for about 8 minutes. So I'm going to play a little bit of music. It'll be nice and soft. We're going to do about 5 minutes of reflection. Get yourself grounded in those core competencies, pull up that reflection guide, and then we'll put you into a partner room. What questions might you have about the next 12 minutes?
Welcome back, everybody, as people start to come back. Not quite yet, right? Are people back yet?
We have 22 more seconds before everybody is back.
Okay, I saw the screen shift, so I was like, oh, people are coming.
It's always a sign they're having good conversations when they don't come back right away.
Yeah. Megan's becoming the IRB superhero of NIRN.
Yay!
She's like, please no.
All right, everyone is now officially back.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, we hope you enjoyed that opportunity to do a little bit of self-reflection, as well as to share your reflection with your colleague, and maybe you made a new friend. If you could please maybe put a shout out of appreciation to your colleague who you worked with in the chat. And Vicki, it was 8 minutes. I know it went really fast, but it was. You must have been really deep in the conversation, which is great. Okay, so we're gonna move forward in talking a little bit deeper around a couple of the competencies based on feedback from last time. I'm going to be completely vulnerable for a moment with you all, if that is okay. Some of the content that we're going to share with you is new content. It's based on some articles and some resources we were reading through. And in my vulnerability, this is the first time I'm sharing it with someone, with you all. So I hope you're going to be a little, my team who knows me, I don't often print and do notes because I only do that when stuff is really new and if I'm a little anxious about it. So I hope it's okay that I'm being totally vulnerable as we go through and sharing some of this new content. So let's jump into it, and you guys can give me feedback if it's resonating or not. So the domain of co-creation and engagement. So I'm going to focus in on brokering and addressing power differentials, because when I do my own self-reflection, I think about those two competencies as something I can always grow in and get better at, especially when I'm trying to center equity in my implementation work and engage the different voices and move forward. So that's also lending itself to my vulnerability with you all. We do have that. I'm not going to go deep into co-learning because we've released that module on the AI Hub that is there as a resource for you. And with our limited time together, Rebecca and I prioritize the brokering and the addressing power differentials. So and I'm going to spend more time on addressing power differentials than brokering, but let's talk a little bit about brokering. Based on some reading I was doing of some different articles, and the full citations are at the end of the slide deck. What struck me about brokering is there's a lot of overlap with our other competencies, right? When I think about it, when I think about brokering, right, it's us as like a bridge, right? We picture ourselves kind of as that bridge in between peoples or groups that are in a system and that are really vital to our implementation efforts, right? And as that broker, Bornebaum, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name, really identify that the activities or the work that we're doing as brokers can kind of fall into 3 buckets. And those buckets are knowledge management, linkage and exchange is what he called it, or he or she, and capacity development. And when we're thinking about knowledge management, what Bornebaum and the colleagues found in their research was doing things like identifying and obtaining relevant information and sharing that from different parties. facilitating the development of individuals' analytic skills, which my mind also is critical for an organization's absorptive capacity, right? We need to be able to analyze information in order to absorb new information. Creating tailored knowledge products, right? So I can't tell you how many times I've taken a tool for an implementation tool and adapt it in some way that I'm tailoring it specifically for that audience or that group of folks that I'm working with. Supporting communication and knowledge sharing was very broad, right? But reinforcing, even in my own institution here at FPG on Monday with leadership, I was like, listen, this got raised as a concern. We're doing this. I need you to transparently at the next meeting share that we have followed up and we're addressing the concern that was raised, right? So prompting for that communication and that knowledge sharing. For linkages and exchange, Bornabon and colleagues really talk to how we identify and we engage and we connect with the critical perspectives that are needed in implementation. Are we stepping back and scanning who is touched or impacted in some way by this work, and how are we engaging and connecting them to it, right? So social network analysis, it can be really key to that when we think about that. Facilitating collaboration, connecting people to relevant resources. They also talked about how linkage and exchange is where that peer-to-peer learning comes into play as well. And then in capacity development, which again is also its own competency for us in implementation, was very similar to how we talk about it within that competency, right? Facilitating knowledge dissemination, delivering training sessions, assessing readiness and capacity for change, facilitating organizational change, right? All those pieces that we do when we're developing capacity. So that was published back in 2015. There was a more recent article by Neil and colleagues that really talked about 5 key strategies that brokers use within implementation work. And those 5 strategies were things such as facilitating relationships, right? So one of our competency, this is where it gets interconnected, right? Interdependent with each other, because another one of our competencies is growing and sustaining relationships. When I think about brokering in terms of facilitating relationships, I think about how I connect people and support the development of their relationship, as well as my own relationship. Disseminating information, which gets at communication as its own competency as well. Finding alignment, right? This was interesting because this strategy was not, when I think about finding alignment, it's finding things that we can be, that are connecting us, that is like the through line, and where we need to think about, can we engage in what I think about as parallel play, right? We're aligning and we're going in parallel to each other, or am I really seeking in my alignment work cooperative play? And do I need parallel or cooperative based on what is the outcome that we're trying to accomplish? As we go forward, Neil and colleagues also spoke to the importance of capacity building and then advising decisions as strategies. So that's a little bit of deeper information when we think about that competency of brokering, right? Helping support the exchange of information and the brokering of the work, and being that connector or that bridge between various groups or actors involved within implementation. All right, let's talk about addressing power differentials. So when I thought about addressing power differentials in that competency, I stepped back for a moment. I had to go back and think about, what are the different types of power that come into play within implementation work? And what rose for me in looking at some different resources was this idea of formal positional power, right? Where that power is designated by an official title, a rank, or a position, right? And all of our organizations that we often reside in, live in, and we work with have a hierarchy of some sort that is in play within implementation. And we talk about in implementation about cultivating leadership and how that role of an executive sponsor, someone who has the formal authority to make decisions, this formal positional power, is necessary, right? But we also need our champions or those informal individuals, right? The social power. And that is power that's not always immediately visible or always officially signed, right? And Stithman talked about informal or the social power and broke that down even more into 4 different types of power that really resonated with me when I think about engaging in implementation practice and supporting others and what I experience in working with teams and organizations. Talked about experiential power. That is the power that we gain from our experience, right? From doing, from training and studying, that actually gives us weight, additional weight in our opinion or our perspective, because we've done it, we've lived it, we breathed it, we tasted it, right? In our work as we go forward. And that manifestation of power is often seen when folks defer to those with that experience, right? There's also relational power. And relational power is all about who you know, right? That's sometimes referred to in the research literature as referent power. And that power is often gained from individuals through connections with others and keeping track of the information that is tied to those relationships. Referent power, the relational power, gives us that ability to leverage, right, strengths and weaknesses of others, to support getting buy-in on ideas, and keeping moving forward with the end goal in mind, right? Or what some may say, pushing the agenda. So we got experiential and relational power. Then we get into the cultural, the systemic power. And that is the type of power that is referred to by a group's ability to, they say, establish and directly benefit from institutions, laws, customs, policies, and to access resources and decision makers. They say this is essentially, it is to establish the standard by which everyone else abides. That we assume it's just the way things are done. Oop, I lost my screen. Where did Rebecca go? Do you guys see it? Oh, there it is. Okay, it's back.
My internet.
So that's okay. So if you can go back one slide, Rebecca, that would be great. So when we think about cultural or systemic power, we think about individuals who from that group of the culture or the system benefit from power, whether or not we're aware of it as we go forward. And then the last type of power that Stithman talked about was circumstantial or majority power, right? This is the power that's assumed to do with being surrounded from those in a community or with a similar identity. It could be a social political identity like race, gender, or it could be based on a shared experience. Systemic power often travels wherever we go, but the majority power is often situational, right? It exists within those certain contexts. All right, so now that I kind of grounded myself in all these different types of powers, what are some implications for us as implementation practitioners? So when I think about that, I think about the implications being, well, that can lead to those power differentials that we talk about needing to be addressed, where we have on teams, we might have some voices that are heard less or heard more than others, right? And that individual's own sense of power or access to power changes depending on their context. And that goes for me as an implementation support practitioner as well, right? So each of us have different things that give us power or restrict our power, and we may or may not be aware of it, right, as we go forward. And although some of the power is attributed to us, whether we wish it or not, right, there is a lot of power that we can build, right? And I really liked Stithman's reframing on this, because the key point is here to build power. We have to recognize it at every level that it's occurring at and learn them through that critical consciousness lens, right? Which also really speaks to me when I think about how we center equity. So what do we do with the power? How do we address it? You can go ahead, Rebecca. So we think about there's power over, which is the coercive power, which we all want to stay away from and not have to be on the receiving end, right? When that's used to either control us or we're using it to control a group. and really thinking about how do we build power with the integrative power that is based on relational and integrative, and some examples for how we can do that. Because I really like this framing of how do we build power as a way of addressing power differentials, right? And so when we think about building power, we can think about how do we build our team's experiential power? How do we step back, avoid the micromanaging, letting emerging leaders take on those bigger responsibilities so that we're building that experiential power within the team for that shared ownership? How do we build circumstantial power, right? By providing the space for affinity groups, committees, or membership opportunities where shared people who have shared experiences can really come together and learn from each other, right? So when I think about that, being that broker of that peer-to-peer learning could be a way to build that, to build power. The relational power, we can build that by cultivating authentic connection with others or between members on our team who may have less positional or social power as we go forward. The best thing about reciprocal relational power is it can be reciprocal, right? We both can benefit from having increased trust. And then the last strategy that was recommended was doing the hard work of looking in the mirror and doing the self-reflection work, right? So it can be really beneficial for us to reflect on our own unearned power and privileges and support others to be able to do that, where we may be in that moment standing as a gatekeeper or decision maker for others, right? So what are those types of questions that we can put forward to teams as they're engaging with data or information and making decisions? Are we having them step back and do that important self-reflection work? And how do we use that to bring others into the dialogue? So a little bit about, so I had to step back. I hope it was okay that I was vulnerable. I'm sure this group's going to give me feedback on how that resonated or not resonated. But it was really important for me to step back when I think about addressing power differentials is what are the types of power that are present? How addressing power, how can I build the type of power that we want to see, and thinking through some of those strategies. So before we jump into ongoing improvement, I just want to take a moment and see, are there any questions, reactions, thoughts for addressing power differentials or brokering? It's okay if not. I'm scanning to see if there's any hands raised.
Hey, Karen, this is John Gipple.
Hey, John.
Hey. A couple of things come to mind that are most recently happened in our experiences. One example of a power differential is if you're going in to do fidelity observations and teachers might be pushing back on that. There might be just a few teachers with a big voice kind of causing the conflict or the challenge where most teachers are totally okay with it. But we hear that voice and we think a situation is bigger than it really is. But how do we use some of our other power in a positive way to help them feel better and address the problem generally? Another power thing I was thinking of is just how sometimes our upper level leaders don't really understand this work and kind of work against us, and how we build those relationships.
Right. So John, you raised like two common things that we hit, right, in implementation work. And we've got a community here that has had experience with those as well. So I have some thoughts that come to mind, but I also want to make sure I'm giving space for voices from the community that maybe have experienced something similar and have found strategies in building power with others, do you know what I mean, to help address some of those power differentials or a different strategy for what you name. So I want to make sure I make space for some folks to drop thoughts in the chat or come off mute like John did and share.
I can jump in, Karen.
Yeah, go for it.
I love that. I love that. And I 100% agree. If any of you have ever read the book, The Power of Protocols, it kind of speaks to this issue and the power that a protocol can, the power of a protocol is in like creating that equity base in a group, because there is a time and a space for people to share. which can call out all voices and not just some voices. So I think that's one strategy.
Thanks. I think it was Jessica, right? That was sharing. Did I get that right?
Yes, yes.
Thanks, Jessica. Other thoughts? So I think about, Jessica, like taking that strategy, John, of a protocol, right, to try and get all voices so that the teachers who maybe are having positive experiences and seeing values and being able to get in the use of the fidelity data and are feeling safe and trusted and feeling trust in doing that, have a way to have their voice be heard, along with those that are and also as a strategy for them to share their experiences with those that are having concerns, is how I could see that information being used. Jessica, was that a good like adaptation? Okay. Other thoughts to John's questions? Rachel's got her hand raised, and it looks like Melissa's putting a good strategy in the chat too. Rachel.
I was just going to say, recently I had this issue come up with a team, and the addressing power differentials, we found it was really helpful to go back to those working agreements and let the data speak for itself. So the dynamic in the room is that you have an executive authority who might be in the room, who may be the superintendent, for example, and then you might have some people who are co-leading the work. And inherent in that is this tension of kind of like who's in charge, because they know who the boss is who might be in the room. But going back to just saying we're holding each other mutually accountable. So as we review the data, it's not any one person's responsibility, but it's everyone's. And that seemed to remove this feeling of peers monitoring peers. So I love the structure of the working agreements and leaning back into those.
Thank you, Rachel. I also think Ellen made a good point in the chat around as you were saying, Rachel, I think it aligned with like just how powerful the use of data and information can be within addressing that too. It was a chat that was earlier, I was scanning, but I was making connections in my head as you were sharing. And Melissa, I think you have a great question there. You know, does this all really boil down to an issue of readiness? Do you know what I mean? When we're trying to work through that. And when I think about individual readiness, like readiness at an individual level, readiness at an organizational level, and readiness at a system level, we're going to need different strategies to cultivate or create that readiness, right? Depending on which level we're referencing there. And with individual, how are we tailoring the rationales to build the importance? Is it a competence issue? So I didn't know if you had a specific level in mind when you were thinking, or were you thinking about all three of like the individual, the organizational, the system?
Yeah, it's sort of tied up in the, I think the system, like the organizational and the system level. And the, I got to go back and look at the, and the formal, like where coercive power typically, at least in my mind, that coercive power sort of typically resides with the more formal positional power. Probably not always, but in the situation I'm thinking of, right? And then, so that ties into a lot of that system and organizational readiness, while there are others with informal and a lot of like capital within the organization, but just continuing to sort of bump up against the formal power that is, you know, coercively kind of continuing to keep that movement around some of these other efforts tamped down. And yeah, I just keep coming back to that readiness question, and how do we leverage our competencies in order, as you were saying, to try to continue to push that readiness forward. As some of our lovely SISUP and NIRN friends say, the gentle pressure applied relentlessly, or the constant drip of the faucet in the bathtub.
That's right.
Right.
Or the sink turned on for the cat to drink water who won't drink out of its own water fountain in my world.
True story. Yes.
All right, fantastic. Okay, well, some really good discussion. I'm just going to quick review some resources that are available on ongoing improvement domain to continue and deepen, and then get us into some small group discussion. Sound okay? And I thank you again for letting me be vulnerable. And this will be a competency that we continue to dig in and try to learn into what works, what doesn't work. How do we adapt for certain situations as we go forward? All right, so ongoing improvement. Rebecca and I just wanted to remind folks of some different resources given our time today. I'm not gonna go in deep into these at all, but just remind you that, you know, when we think about conducting improvement cycles, there's a number of resources there around PDSA, planning tools, and lessons. Got a project coming out. We have a project right now with a NIC, a network improvement community, where we are having lots of internal debate about what is enough, what is good enough when it comes to planning a PDSA and documentation. And we've kind of created this Mac Daddy version out, and we're debating on, okay, who's going to do this, right? How do we make this useful as we go forward? You've got some briefs and some blogs, and then you've got some videos and some resources from the field. And as Rebecca noted, Wendy and the team have an understanding context lesson coming soon. That's going to be released at the end of November, beginning of December. That's going to go into different types of contacts that are present in our work. How do they interact with each other? What are strategies that we can use to understand context and move that work going forward? And then for applying and integrating implementation science strategies, the hub is full of strategies, implementation strategies we can use in our work. And how do we pull on what, when we need to as we go forward? Okay, so I'm going to take a sip of water and get us into some small group discussion. So what we're going to do is, I believe, Rebecca, jump in here if I get this wrong, but we're going to have breakout rooms where you get to, in your group, you're going to pick your own core competency to focus on. Is that an area you feel, and then discuss, is that an area you feel strong in, to share your experiences? Is it a growth? What tools or resources would you like us to create or to support you in that core competency? And then you'll get an opportunity to pick another one if we have time. Did I get that right, Rebecca? Any other directions you would add?
Yep. So real quick, it is 1:26. We're going to leave the rooms open until 1:40, and we're going to bring you back about 1:40. So what I've done is, because there's so many of us, there's 2 rooms for each of the core competencies that we've been talking about, everything from co-learning to understanding context. You'll get to pick that room. We like to keep the rooms to about 4 or 5 individuals. So if there's more than 4 or 5, hop to the second one. That's why I built that second space. But if you want to be in a big group, go for it. Also, if the conversation is not meeting your need as an implementation support practitioner, you can come back to the main session and go into a different area. You can go into a different competency area, but the 15 minutes is yours to join these conversations. This is a little bit of an experiment, so just be patient with us. We're trying to conduct this like a regular conference where you would use the 2 feet rule. If it's not meeting your need, you need to go to another session that does, right? So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. And down at the bottom, you should be able to find where the breakout rooms are available and select your topic. If you need help being assigned to the topic you want to attend, just let us know. And we will be bringing you back about 1:40 back into the main session.
Welcome back. We would just want to open up for a couple groups who would be willing to share any of their ahas or takeaways, individuals within the groups to share from their discussion. And as always, give some shout outs in the chat to your different group members for discussion. So anybody like to share any reflections or thoughts from their group's discussion? The power differentials groups were huge. Any key takeaways?
I'll say something in regards to implementation science.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie.
And it's, yeah, you're welcome. So we were having this conversation and I didn't get a chance to finish because we ran out of time, but one of the things I think is interesting that came out of the conversation is we were talking about, working with the folks that we're working with and supporting, and how it's, you're out in the field and you're trying to use implementation science and help people understand that work. And it was interesting because some folks kind of mentioned how we talked about how it's almost like it has to be veiled because like it overwhelms people. And then like the other side of it is like, I feel like it needs to be like made as explicit as possible because people understand, like, and so anyway, it was just, that's where we kind of got cut off and we didn't even get to like expand that conversation. But I've been fascinated with that for a while, of like, just that transparency and like explicitness versus like the facilitation and having it veiled. So I don't know what else to say other than that. Interesting though. You're laughing, so it's not the first time this has come up.
No,
Yeah.
I'm laughing and I'm smiling because I so resonate with it. Like
I know. It's like
we wrestle with it every day, and I'm hearing Dean Fixon in my head, just in time, just enough is what you're trying to with that catchphrase figure out for what you need to get done. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes when you don't make it explicit and then it becomes explicit, people are like, well, why didn't you just say that in the beginning? You know, and then you have it's too much, you know what I mean? And they lose the actual practice that you're trying to support. Do you know what I mean? And lose focus on that. And
I sometimes I think people are just like, Melanie, like, go away. They're just like, just stop talking so big about things, you know what I mean? But yet, like, I feel like it's so important to understand the bigger picture to like make everything make sense. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I mean, obviously I'm not the only one wrestling with that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a tension for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of fun though.
It's fun. Thank you for being willing to share and come off. Anybody else willing to build on what Melanie is saying or take us in a different direction with a reflection or a thought from your group?
We talked a little bit about the need to have know your stakeholders well enough or learn enough about your stakeholders and your groups to make sure that you're talking in a way that encourages them to listen, that you're really kind of working on making sure that the data that you're bringing forth and all of the things that you're using are actually they're fit right for that audience, for that group of stakeholders, so that they can engage in the task more, and just to recognize that what we might be dealing with every day is not necessarily the exact same thing. So kind of recognizing that from the different contexts.
Thanks, Julie. Totally. I'm head nodding with you and seeing others head nodding with you. Understanding who we're working with and the context. And I also sometimes think about adults can be like kids. I always sometimes, when I was working more directly with kids, I sometimes would have to remind myself, sometimes they're maybe it's not, when they get off the bus in the morning, am I going to have like a cool, calm, like cup of tea and ready to go? Or is it a shaken soda can? And am I going to be the one to trigger and pop the lid and it's going to go, woof, right? Maybe a silly analogy, but something like someone shared that with me and it stuck in my head. And I think adults can be the same way, like walking into a room, we sometimes don't know the context. And is it like a shaken soda can or a pop can, depending on where you're from in the country, that I'm going to unintentionally pop the lid on and not know that I'm doing so. Maybe a silly analogy on this Wednesday.
And I would go back to, the comment of how much do you share? How much do you talk about implementation science? Because there's always a few people that, in my experience, who will glom onto one little piece And that's what they focus on, as opposed to understanding everything in context or the bigger picture. And it's really hard to get them off of that one little piece when that's where their focus is.
Or they think that's the it, right?
That was
Yeah.
practice profiles for me. That became my it. I love this, and that's all I focused on.
You went practice profile happy. That's what we call it. Pull it back, pull it back. I'm seeing some chuckling. I think some folks can probably relate to that too. Thanks, Rebecca, for sharing where you went happy.
Some of us get focused on not talking about practice profiles, and that's a problem also, right? So
Me and John, you don't have a clearly defined it, so you can't design the infrastructure that you need for it. That can happen too. All right, any other final thoughts before we move into our last remaining sections? Okay, what we would like to do is we're going to combine the next activity. It's an independent reflection journaling, along with, we're going to combine that with an opportunity for a bio break or a mental break from your computer screen. So if you need some water, some coffee, whatever you need to like take your eyes off the screen for a moment, turn off your camera, please do so. Rebecca's going to play some of that fabulous music again. And we're going to take 9 minutes just to kind of take that mental break and do some care of each other and self-care, and then some reflective journaling to the prompt. So we'll see you back at 2 o'clock. I'm hopping to another training for for Michigan, another group for them. So I'm going to hop at 2, and Rebecca's going to take you all home. I just can't thank you enough for joining with us on this journey, and emphasize how much we've learned together with you all, and how we're excited to keep the conversation going as well. So we'll see you back at 2 o'clock.
Okay, it is 2 o'clock. I think I timed the music selection perfectly there. If you could turn your videos back on so I know that you are with me. Thank you so much. Hopefully you had some time to kind of just reflect on your thoughts, take some time to process the information we provided for you today. And what we're going to jump into next is really kind of a culmination of our time together. I'm super excited about this part. In regards to thinking about your core competencies, this concept of what happens as a support practitioner when you hit full implementation with the team, and really some individual goal setting for you in regards to moving forward. As I indicated at the beginning of our session, we do have a draft document that you as participants of the session will be able to access and utilize and give us some feedback on. So let's jump into our last 30 minutes together. So when we talk about full implementation, we are thinking about sustainability at this point with the teams and the organizations that we support. We think about making sure that they are using data to critically examine and improve constantly. It's not, it's funny when people think full implementation, they think, oh, we're done. When they think sustainability, oh, we're done, but it's never done. And it just keeps going, and making sure that you're constantly looking at that data, constantly supporting improvement. Monitor and improve supports and resources, especially with the turnover rate within our public agencies and our government agencies and the medical field. There's always turnover. And so it's really important to provide those supports and resources and make sure that the agencies you're supporting have those systems and structures in place to do that, to build that capacity. Continue to collect data during full implementation and provide those feedback loops, making sure everybody's having conversations around the evidence-based practice that is being implemented, and evaluate. We still are evaluating. We still want to make sure that that practice or program or that usable innovation that you're implementing is still meeting the need, and there's not a missing piece. So as ISPs, this is where your role really comes into play of helping them and focusing on sustaining change. It's towards the tail end when things start to slip and maybe we're not meeting as much, and we're not, oh yeah, we forgot about that collection of that data point, things of that nature, right? So what do we mean by sustainability? Yolanda, I'm going to invite you to come on off mute whenever, because Yolanda and I have had a lot of conversations around sustainability. It's a topic we're both really interested in. And what we found when we were looking at sustainability was there's really two different approaches within implementation practice. There's this concept that sustainability is a linear approach. It's that chugging through the stages and the phases, we hit sustainability and we're done. We reached our goal. Everybody is implementing what we want and we're good. Well, that doesn't sit well with us, right? Because we know if we don't stay on top of it, it's going to get watered down. I have seen it where practices go into play and things are going well and all the classrooms are rocking and rolling. And then it's like 2 years later, the new teachers are like, what curriculum? Right? So making sure that those systems and those pieces are in place to avoid that linear stoppage at the end. And that's where that dynamic approach comes in, right? When we're talking about sustainability and full implementation, it's not only sustainability of the practice or the program you're implementing, but it's also really making sure that we have sustainability in our training protocols and our selection protocols for staff. It's making sure that the team is constantly going through improvement cycles, even when we think we're done. It's pulling things up, making sure it's that constant ebb and flow of the stages that really dive into that dynamic approach to keep that sustainability alive. So I'm going to pause there. Yolanda, any thoughts on that? Did I cover everything?
I think you covered everything very well, Rebecca. Just that reminder that sustainability is throughout the stages and thinking about it as you're going through all of the processes.
So what does that mean when we're talking about the connection to the ISP core competencies? So just because this is our last session doesn't mean it's over. We're taking a dynamic approach with this. We have hopefully reached a point where you guys are comfortable with the content, but the fact of the matter is that we have collected so much data over these 4 sessions and the team really hasn't had a chance to dive deep into it like we want to. In addition to that, we want you to continue to monitor and progress and grow and utilize these tools and resources as they come out. We're going to stay in touch, because that's what we do. You are officially honorary NIRNians. You are now our group. And we want to stay in touch. So you'll be getting things like surveys, additional supports, and you're going to be part of a growing community that we're really focused on developing. So we're super excited to have you have been part of this process. So what does that mean in regards to really monitoring your own progression and your own growth with the core competencies? I'm going to have Amelia put a link in the chat. Sorry, I'm giggling. I like Ellenisms as well, Melissa. I appreciate Ellenisms. I have a whole whiteboard of them. So in the chat, Amelia's put a planning document in here. It's a 4-step process. And like I said, this is a drafty draft. This is something we've been working on that is available to you to use. Now, Vicki earlier in the chat had mentioned there's 15 core competencies. How do you keep track of all this? How do you know you're doing it on a day-to-day basis? And the reality of it is you have to have a plan. You have to think about how you want to work through where you feel your strengths and your areas of growth are. So it's a 4-step process. Some of it you've already done already. You identify your two core competencies that are strengths and 2 that would be growth, but write down your evidence for your reasoning behind that. Really reflect on why you rated or why you identified that as either a strength or a growth area for you. Step 2, define 2 goals. Keep it simple. We are busy lives and you are working with agencies and teams that have multiple goals as well. So keep it simple. Think about 2 goals you want to achieve. Maybe it's really supporting someone in an area that's a strength for you. Maybe it's focusing on one of those areas that need to be a growth. We have step 3 is some additional reflection questions for you. And then step 4, based on your reflection and your goals, just think of some things you're going to start doing, some things you're going to stop doing, and some things that you think you're doing well and you want to continue doing. And finally, when are you going to revisit this plan? Put a little note on your calendar, put a reminder, so that way you don't forget, that you can revisit it for your own internal growth. Because we're so busy helping other people understand and learn and grow that sometimes we don't put our own growth at the forefront. And so we would like to spend some time providing you that space. But first we want some feedback, because that's kind of what we do. So you have the tool in front of you. We just want some immediate reactions. What is your immediate reaction to the document? What questions might you have? What is missing on this document that you would want? What are some changes that you would like to see? We're going to put you into some random small groups. We have a Padlet for you. I told you there was one data collection point throughout this session. This is it. What can we do to improve this draft document before we start to utilize it? After we collect your feedback from this time, we're going to make some modifications to this form, and then we're going to send it out to you as a group in an email to fill out and utilize, and then we'll follow up with a survey for usability testing. So that's just to kind of go through the process. We're going to give you, let's see, it's 2:08. How about 7 minutes? 3 questions, 7 minutes. It's a couple page document. And then we'll go from there. Will that work? Right. If you have any questions, pop it in the chat. Amelia has put the planning document as well as the Padlet in the chat for me. And I'm going to go ahead and I am going to open those rooms. Next steps, your next steps. Complete this document once we send it to you. Start to really think about how you want to grow as an implementation support practitioner. We'll be providing a survey for you to complete as well, like I had indicated. Sign up for Slack. So we're trying this new thing where we're having an external Slack area to help build community, a place where you can comfortably share your thoughts and ideas, ask questions, and I'm going to go ahead and pull it up. When you join, you will receive access to the NIRN team. You'll see where we're going to be providing announcements, articles that come out, celebrations with the people that we're working with, different collaborations that are possible, opportunities, questions. So we're going to try to create a continuing space for this group to continue to reflect and share, because that was a request in your feedback from the last session. Also, keep an eye out for the AI Hub updates that will be launching at the end of January. It's going to be a process with some transitions and getting people to the right places. So we're going to try to be as clear as possible when that occurs. So our next steps, this has been our journey throughout this entire session. We started out with, just dipping our toes with the domains. And then we took a quick overview of the core competencies. And then we dug a little deeper last time. And today we really focused in on those areas that were identified as a group, as an area of growth. We did promise that we were going to start to develop some companion tools and resources based on this session. The ISP planning document is the first that we put together that's open for usability for you to use, to give us feedback on. But we're also going to continue on and dig through the data that you provided. That's why things like the evaluation survey and your participation in the activities was so important, because we are going to continue to provide support, redesign the session a little bit, provide it again, and potentially look at how we can expand it out and provide more support. So just a thank you on joining us on this journey that we have taken. As always, you can join us on social and on our website, as well as visit the activities. The recording is going to be available, as well as the resources from today's session, with the exception of the planning document, on the virtual landing page. Virtual event landing page, and the recording will be sent out to everybody who registered for the event. And with that, I'm going to have Amelia go ahead and pop the evaluation into the chat. We've given you an additional 5 minutes to complete that evaluation because your responses are so important, because we use that data to really reflect and change and modify our supports. So with that, I'm going to give you the last 5 minutes to complete that. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you and sharing with you some more, and keep an eye out for some emails. If you have any questions, I'll be staying on. If you want to chit chat or want to go into a small breakout room, just let me know. And with that, have a wonderful holiday season, and thank you for joining our series.